Jessie had always dreamed of a real outdoor adventure. When her friends suggested spending the weekend at a remote lake in the Colorado mountains, she eagerly agreed. A group of 4 friends, Jessie, Mike, Emily, and Alex, set out on Friday evening, full of enthusiasm and anticipation for a fun getaway. After several hours of driving along winding mountain roads, they finally reached the lake. It was surrounded by dense forest and high cliffs, creating a sense of complete isolation from civilization. The friends quickly set up camp on the shore, pitched their tents, and lit a campfire. The first night passed peacefully. They sat around the fire, telling stories and enjoying the starry sky. But the next day, things began to change. In the morning, Jessie noticed strange tracks around their camp. They didn't resemble the prints of any animal she knew. The friends decided it must be some local beast and didn't give it much thought. Throughout the day, they explored the surroundings, swam in the lake, and enjoyed nature. But as the sun began to set, Jessie couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching them. She kept looking around but saw nothing but trees and rocks. In the evening, sitting around the campfire, they heard a strange cry from the forest. It didn't sound like any animal they knew. It was something between a howl and a human scream. Everyone froze, listening. The cry repeated, closer this time. Alex suggested going to check, but the others dissuaded him, deciding it was safer to stay by the fire. The night was restless. Jessie woke up several times to rustling around the tent. Once, she thought she saw a dark figure moving between the trees, but when she looked more closely, there was nothing there. On the third day, tension in the group increased. Emily claimed she had seen someone watching them from the forest, but when they went to check, they found no one. Mike suggested packing up and leaving, but the others decided to stay, thinking their imagination was just running wild. In the evening, they decided to walk around the lake. The sun had almost set, and the forest was sinking into twilight. Suddenly, Jessie noticed something strange. On the opposite shore of the lake stood a tall, thin figure. It was so motionless that at first, it seemed like a tree. But then the figure turned its head and looked directly at them. The friends froze in horror. The figure began to move towards the water, not taking its eyes off them. Its movements were unnatural, like a marionette. When it entered the water and began approaching them, the friends ran back to the camp. They quickly packed their things, deciding to leave immediately. But when they got to the car, they found all the tires punctured. Panic gripped the group. They decided to walk to the nearest town, knowing it would take several hours. The night was dark, and the forest seemed alive around them. They heard rustling and cracking branches, as if someone was following them. Several times, Jessie thought she saw the same tall figure between the trees, but when she pointed it out to others, there was nothing there. Suddenly, they heard the same cry they had heard earlier, but now it was coming from all sides, as if they were surrounded by a pack of unknown creatures. The friends ran, stumbling in the darkness and desperately trying to find their way. After what seemed like hours of running, they finally saw the lights of the town. Emerging from the forest, they looked back. At the edge of the forest stood the same tall figure, but now they could see it better. It was a creature that looked human-like, but with unnaturally long limbs and pale, almost transparent skin. It looked at them with its black, pupilless eyes, then slowly retreated back into the darkness of the forest. The friends made it to the nearest police station, where they told their story. The police searched the area, but found nothing. The friends' car was found at their campsite, but there were no traces or evidence of anyone else's presence. Jessie and her friends never returned to that lake. They tried to forget about that terrible experience, but every time they heard about people disappearing in the forests, they couldn't help but think about that tall, pale figure that might still be wandering in the dark woods around Shadow Lake. This event forever changed their attitude towards nature. What once seemed peaceful and calm now had a sinister tinge. They realized that in the depths of the forests, things might be hiding that the human mind cannot comprehend, and that sometimes The greatest danger lurks where we least expect it. Sarah had always been an avid hiker and camper, but nothing could have prepared her for the terrifying events that unfolded during her solo trek through Blackwood Forest in the remote wilderness of Oregon. The forest had a reputation for its pristine beauty and challenging trails, making it a perfect destination for experienced outdoor enthusiasts like Sarah. As she set out on a crisp autumn morning, the air was filled with the earthy scent of pine and decaying leaves. The forest canopy filtered the sunlight, creating a dappled pattern on the forest floor. Sarah felt a sense of peace wash over her as she ventured deeper into the woods, her backpack laden with supplies for a week-long adventure. The first 2 days of her journey were uneventful, filled with breathtaking views and the soothing sounds of nature. However, on the third night, things took an unsettling turn. As Sarah sat by her campfire, she noticed an unnatural silence descending upon the forest. The usual chirping of crickets and rustling of small animals had ceased, leaving an eerie void. Just as she was about to retire to her tent, a faint whisper carried on the wind caught her attention. It sounded like her name, but she couldn't be sure. Sarah scanned the darkness beyond the firelight, but saw nothing. Shaking off the uneasy feeling, she crawled into her sleeping bag, attributing the whisper to her imagination. The next morning, Sarah woke to find strange symbols carved into the trees surrounding her campsite. They looked ancient and indecipherable, their edges fresh as if they had been etched overnight. A chill ran down her spine as she realized she hadn't heard a sound during the night, not even the crackling of her dying fire. As she continued her hike that day, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig made her jump. The forest, once welcoming, now seemed to close in around her, its shadows deeper and more menacing than before. That evening, as she set up camp near a small stream, Sarah noticed something reflecting the last rays of sunlight. Upon closer inspection, she found a strange artifact half buried in the soil. A small, intricately carved stone figurine that seemed to depict a grotesque, inhuman face. Despite her unease, Sarah's curiosity got the better of her, and she placed the figurine in her backpack. As night fell, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. They seemed to come from all directions, calling her name and speaking in a language she couldn't understand. Sarah huddled in her tent, her heart racing as shadows danced on the canvas walls. The temperature dropped dramatically, her breath visible in the frigid air despite the season. In the middle of the night, Sarah was jolted awake by a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the forest. It sounded human, yet not quite right, as if it were being filtered through something inhuman. She frantically searched for her flashlight, her hands shaking as she pointed the beam towards the sound. The light fell upon a figure standing just beyond the clearing. It was tall and gaunt, its limbs too long and joints bent at unnatural angles. Its skin was pale and seemed to shimmer in the moonlight, almost translucent. But it was the creature's face that made Sarah's blood run cold. It was identical to the face on the stone figurine she had found. Sarah watched in horror as the figure took a step forward, its movements jerky and unsettling. She scrambled out of her tent, abandoning her gear as she fled into the darkness of the forest. Branches whipped at her face as she ran blindly, the sound of pursuit close behind. As she ran, Sarah noticed more symbols carved into the trees, glowing with a faint, sickly light. The whispers grew louder, surrounding her, disorienting her. She lost all sense of direction, the forest seeming to shift and change around her. Just when she thought her legs would give out, Sarah burst through the tree line onto a dirt road. A pair of headlights approached, and she frantically waved her arms. The car screeched to a halt, and an elderly couple helped her inside, alarmed by her terrified state and the cuts and bruises covering her body. As they drove her to the nearest town, Sarah glanced back at the forest. For a moment, she thought she saw multiple pale figures standing at the edge of the trees, watching her departure. But when she blinked, they were gone. In the days that followed, Sarah tried to make sense of what had happened. The police searched the area, but found no trace of her campsite or the strange symbols. The stone figurine was missing from her backpack, leaving her to question if it had ever existed at all. Theories abounded, from hallucinations caused by toxic forest fungi to an encounter with an unknown cult. Some even suggested a run-in with supernatural entities. But for Sarah, the truth was far more terrifying than any explanation offered. She knew what she had seen and heard in Blackwood Forest. The memory of those glowing symbols, the inhuman whispers, and the pale figure with its unnatural movements would haunt her dreams for years to come. Sarah never went camping again, and to this day, she can't shake the feeling that something from those woods followed her home, waiting, watching, whispering her name in the dead of night. The experience in Blackwood Forest had shattered Sarah's perception of reality and the natural world. What was once a source of joy and adventure had become a realm of terror and unknown dangers. She realized that there were things in the wilderness, and perhaps in the world at large, that defied explanation and challenged everything she thought she knew. As news of her experience spread, others came forward with similar stories of strange encounters in Blackwood Forest. Whispers of an ancient, forgotten history began to circulate, of rituals performed by long-gone civilizations that had opened doorways best left closed. Some claimed the forest itself was alive, conscious, and not entirely of this world. Sarah's story served as a chilling reminder that even in the age of satellite mapping and GPS, there are still places in the world where the unexplained lurks just beyond the reach of firelight, waiting for unsuspecting travelers to venture too far from the safety of the known world. Deep in the forests of northern Minnesota, where silence is broken only by the whisper of wind in the crowns of ancient pines, lies Lake Despair. Despite its ominous name, this place attracted tourists with its untouched beauty and the promise of true solitude in nature's lap. Mark and Lisa, a young couple from Chicago, decided to spend their vacation here to escape the urban hustle and strengthen their relationship. They arrived at the lake on a sunny July day, when the water sparkled in the midday sun, and the air was filled with the aroma of pine and wildflowers. The couple set up camp on a small clearing right at the water's edge. The first day passed idyllically. They swam in the cool lake water, sunbathed on the shore, and enjoyed the silence, broken only by birdsong and the chirping of insects. In the evening, they sat by the campfire, admiring the stars and planning their further adventures. However, as night fell, the atmosphere around the lake began to change. Mark woke up around midnight to a strange sound coming from the water. It was like a splash, but unnatural, rhythmic, as if something huge was slowly moving under the lake's surface. He looked out of the tent but saw nothing in the impenetrable darkness. The sound stopped as suddenly as it had started. The next morning, the couple discovered strange tracks in the sand by the water. They didn't resemble the tracks of any animals they knew, too big for a wolf or bear, but not like human footprints either. The tracks led from the water and disappeared at the forest's edge. Mark and Lisa decided it must be a prank by other tourists, although they hadn't seen anyone nearby since their arrival. The day passed without incident, but Mark couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Several times he thought he saw movement between the trees, but when he looked closely, there was no one there. Lisa also felt uneasy, complaining of a headache and strange pressure in her ears. In the evening, sitting by the fire, they heard a scream coming from the forest. It sounded human, but there was something wrong about it, as if it was a creature only trying to imitate a human voice. The scream repeated several times, each time closer to their camp. Mark took a flashlight and went to check the surroundings, but found nothing unusual. At night, Lisa woke up feeling that someone was watching her. Opening her eyes, she saw the silhouette of a tall figure standing at the tent entrance. The figure was motionless, and in the dim moonlight penetrating through the tent fabric, it seemed to have abnormally long arms and an unnaturally elongated neck. Lisa closed her eyes in terror, and when she opened them again, the figure was gone. On the third day, the couple decided to explore the lake's surroundings. They found an old, overgrown trail leading deep into the forest. Following it, they stumbled upon an abandoned ranger's cabin. Inside, everything was covered with a thick layer of dust, but on the table lay a fresh sheet of paper with a handwritten warning: "Leave before it's too late." Alarmed by the discovery, Mark and Lisa hurried back to their camp. On the way, it seemed to them that the forest around them had changed. The trees stood closer together. Their branches seemed to reach out to the travelers, trying to grab them. The sun was already setting when they finally reached the lake. What they saw made them freeze in place. Their tent was torn to shreds, belongings scattered all over the clearing. On the sand, they saw the same strange tracks they had seen earlier, but now there were many of them, and they led directly to their destroyed camp. Panic gripped the couple. They began frantically gathering what was left of their belongings, deciding to leave immediately. But when they reached the place where they had left their car, it wasn't there. Tire tracks were visible on the ground, leading into the forest on a road that hadn't been there before. As darkness fell, the forest around the lake came alive. Rustles and cracking branches came from everywhere, as if multiple creatures surrounded Mark and Lisa. They heard heavy breathing and strange, gurgling sounds coming from the water. In desperation, they decided to run down the road, hoping to find help. The run through the dark forest seemed endless. Tree branches lashed at their faces, roots as if alive, tried to grab their feet. Behind them came sounds of pursuit, heavy footsteps, and hoarse breathing of unknown pursuers. Suddenly, the forest parted, and they ran out onto a highway. In the headlights of an approaching truck, they saw their pursuers, tall, pale figures with unnaturally long limbs and faces more like masks than human faces. The creatures stopped at the forest's edge, not daring to step onto the lit road. The truck stopped, and a kind driver picked up the exhausted couple. As they drove away from Lake Despair, Mark and Lisa saw the strange creatures slowly dissolving into the darkness of the forest, as if merging with the shadows. At the police station in the nearest town, their story wasn't believed. Police officers who inspected the lake area found no traces of the camp or strange creatures. Mark and Lisa's car was found parked on the roadside, several miles from the lake. Many dismissed their story as hallucinations caused by stress or poisonous mushrooms. But Mark and Lisa knew they had experienced something inexplicable and terrible. They never went camping again and couldn't calmly look at forest landscapes. Years later, browsing through old newspapers, Mark came across an article about strange disappearances in the Lake Despair area. For decades, people had vanished there without a trace. Local legends spoke of ancient forest spirits guarding their domain from human intrusion. Other stories told of secret experiments conducted in these forests during the Cold War, resulting in the appearance of terrible mutants. The truth about what lurks in the depths of the forests near Lake Despair remained a mystery, but for Mark and Lisa, it forever remained a symbol that there are things in the world beyond human understanding, and that sometimes the scariest things lurk where we least expect them.